back to your question about how to build a reading habit, it's you need to be very honest with yourself about what you're interested in. And starting from having an idea of what piques your interest, I think if you can choose topics and books and authors that are focused on those interests, that is the best way to build a reading habit, because then it does not feel like a chore. It really just feels like a leisure activity.
Jim Mullane, how are you, my friend?
Pleasant, doing well, enjoying my lockdown in style here in my sweatpants and my sweatshirt. Doing well.
Enjoying that new mustache?
It's not new. Unfortunately, it's all I can grow.
That's some serious tash going on there.
Yeah, so I like to tell people I'm a little follically challenged, so I like to overcompensate with the mustache because it grabs people's attention and then it veers the attention away from the fact that's all I can grow. So
yeah,
focus on your strengths.
I get it, man. Peacocking, but only above the lip.
Yes, yeah. Eyes up here.
Yeah, up top. So your Instagram account, which is what a lot of people listening might know you for, Get Better with Books. How would you describe, what is that? What is Get Better with Books?
Get Better with Books is currently the fastest growing Instagram page focused specifically on self-help, personal development, business-related books. It really just started as a creative endeavor where I could combine my interest in photography and my interest in reading and have something to do outside of my day job. But I've been doing it for almost 2 years now. May 15th will be my 2-year anniversary running the page. And I think as of today, I'm a little over 85,000 followers. So I'm a little dumbfounded of how quickly it's grown and the fact that people enjoy seeing content specifically around books. But it's been a fun journey so far.
Why do you think it is popular?
I think it for a couple different reasons. Number one, it speaks to the attitudes of a lot of people out there, not just in the U.S., but internationally speaking. If you take a look at some of the data that I get to pull from the Instagram account, I'd say a third of my audience is U.S. based, but the third's in Europe. I'd say an overwhelming majority of people are from India. And I think it speaks to the psychographic of certain people who are just focused on developing themselves as an individual, right? They use books as a tool to better themselves. And I think it speaks to a lot of people who love reading, but more importantly, improving themselves.
Yeah, for sure. How many books have you read? Do you know?
I haven't kept count, unfortunately.
You're not one of these people that's like religious on Goodreads or anything like that?
No, I don't keep an active Goodreads account, but if I were to estimate how many books that I've read in my lifetime, I'd say probably like 150, 160 books. And I think last year and the year before were really the first 2 years that I've actually kept track of how many books I've read. So last year, I think I got up to 50 for the course of the year. And the year before I was at, little over 30. And it's important to also acknowledge the fact that these metrics, like how many books that you've read or how quickly you read books, I think that can be a distraction for a lot of people, right? They see books as almost like a vanity metric, right? Like how many books have you read in total? And I have this conversation with a lot of other book Instagram accounts that I see as cohorts. And we almost see that as a disdain, right? Like if you read 100 books in a month, but you don't retain anything, right? Is it worth it, or are you just using that metric to as a feather in your cap, if you will?
Yeah, well, I mean, in this age now, this sort of burgeoning underground movement, the new aphorists that are coming out, that like the maxims, this show is called Modern Wisdom. I am part of the fucking problem as far as that bit's concerned, but
Thanks, Chris.
There is like there is an ongoing subculture now of people that I think are kind of repatriating wisdom, like kind of falling back into the timeless understandings of the principles that we should live our life by, trying to uncover what we are, who we are, why we like the things we like, why the world operates the way that it does. And you're totally correct as well that by reading a lot, or by saying that you read a lot, you never know if someone actually does read 2 books a week or whatever, by either saying that you read a lot or reading a lot, you get to have the proxy, you get to have the veneer of looking wise, whilst not ever having to deploy any wisdom. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an interesting juxtaposition of the two, right? Because you have the short morsels of wisdom that you get from social media, and you overlay that with the long form content, which is inherently in books, right? And comparing the two on the surface, it almost seems like it doesn't mix, right? Like how can you surmise a 300 and 400 page book, like 12 Rules of Life, right? Jordan Peterson, for example, right? And you see he's very popular on social media, but it's hard to distill wisdom in a book like that in, an Instagram post, right? So it's an interesting dynamic between the two, but I also think it's a good opportunity to just expose more people to the benefits of reading, because there are a lot of people who come to my account and they ask me questions. They're like, hey, bro, like, I just started reading a couple months ago. Like, what books would you recommend to a beginner? And for someone like me, I don't see myself as an expert, right? Like, I'm just someone who likes reading, and I have an Instagram page. Like, apparently that makes me an expert. But at the end of the day, there are a handful of books that I always go to as, hey, you're new to reading. Here are a few that you should consider reading. So, I guess I am somewhat of a book expert if you follow my Instagram page.
I get it. Yeah, we are going to get into that. We've got all of the recommendations, and that will be coming in a little bit. But cool. First, what I wanted to ask was, what are the common mistakes that you think people make, or perhaps the ones that you made as well, when building a reading habit? Because before you read the books that you might recommend to people, there has to be a habit to be able to actually get through them.
Absolutely. I think the first mistake that I come across from a lot of new people is they feel like you have to finish a book, right? If you come across a book that was highly recommended and maybe you just don't find it interesting, it doesn't pique your nerve, or it doesn't strike your nerve at all, you feel like you are forced to finish it from end to end, right? And that's one of the biggest mistakes, because if you are not interested in a book, it's going to feel like a chore, right? It's not going to feel like something that you're actually getting a lot of benefit from. So if you don't like a book, please do not waste the time. I mean, it's kind of like watching a movie. If you're sitting at home watching Netflix and you come across a movie and 10, 15 minutes into it, you just don't like it, you don't sit through the next 45, 50 minutes, right? So it shouldn't be anything different than reading a book. And I think a lot of people just have this attitude that I have to finish a book.
Yeah. Is it just sunk cost fallacy? Is it that people see it as a badge of honor to get through a difficult book?
Sometimes there's a lot of public relations when it comes to, hey, say I'm going to read this book and I need to save face by actually finishing it from start to end, where having a little bit of self-confidence to say, like, you know what, I did not like this book. I wanted to put it down and I wanted to start something that I'm interested in. So it's really just being comfortable with yourself to say, yeah, I'm not digging this, I'm going to put it down.
Yeah, it's the other thing as well. This came from Kamal Ravikant, a conversation I had with him. And he said 90% of self-development books should have been, 50% of self-development books should have been an article, and 49% should have been a tweet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's 1% which actually needed 300 pages, 400 pages to pad out the concept. Jordan Peterson's is a good example, or anything by Taleb. Like, there's not really, it's not about the one thing, you know? Right. Yeah. Like Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport should have been an article. Now, don't get me wrong, you can have this, here's a strategy and it's a workbook and a course or whatever that you want to set on the side. But that could have been long blog post.
Right. And if you read a lot more books, you come to that realization that most of the books that you read, they're either similar in a lot of ways, or just like you said, they probably could have been summarized in a page, or maybe in a YouTube video. And I think one of the books in a hot take here, and I actually get a lot of flack on Instagram for this, is there's a book, Start With Why, by Simon Sinek. It's widely popular in the Bookstagram sphere, and people say this is a life-changing book. And I came across the book and I said, this is mildly interesting, but I think it's very superficial. I think it's very redundant, and I wasn't a huge fan of this. And I've been very public about my stance about that book, and that just goes to your fact that not everyone has the same opinions on popular books. And I think it's very important to be upfront with yourself, to not pretend that you enjoy a book just because it's popular. But to your point about these books that could be maybe summarized in a blog post, that was one of them. I think there's a 4 or 5 minute video on YouTube about the Start With Why concept by him talking in a TED Talk. So anyone who has not read Start With Why, I would say just check out his YouTube video. And if it's something that piques your interest a little bit more, then maybe pick up the book. So hopefully I saved you a couple days of reading there.
Yeah, for sure. Mark Manson, The Subtle Art, like just didn't get it, man. Just didn't. I'm like, okay, Mark, you keep swearing. Cool. Like,
that's where you draw the line.
You just kept on swearing. I was like, I get it. Like, this is a book that's about swearing. And it, like, that was it. But then Models by him, How to Attract Women Through Honesty, is amazing. And that couldn't have been a tweet. That couldn't have been a blog post or an article. Any guys listening who want to kind of up their game, especially as we're about to re-release ourselves back out of lockdown, Models by Mark Manson is like the pickup artistry book for people that don't want to be seedy pickup artists. It's about how to maximize your confidence, how to actually be a fuller version of you, and the basics of attraction between men and women. And I think it's great. But Subtle Art, I was like, all right, Mark, cool.
And I think it's important to understand that you don't have to like every book that's popular on social media. And when it comes to enjoying books, I think a lot of it has to do with not only the content, but the author's writing style, right? You can come across an author that you just truly vibe with how they write. And regardless of what the content is, you could sit down for hours and hours at a day just because of the writing style. It's so enjoyable, right?
Who are some of those authors for you?
Number one that comes to mind is David Brooks. He wrote a couple books, The Road to Character, which is easily in my top 10 books. It's more that self-help book, but it's more emphasizing true virtues, right? Like living with chivalry and just living with honor, and as opposed to focusing on the external virtues, right, of commerce and status, right? It's more important to be upfront with yourself and what you truly believe in. So The Road to Character, David Brooks, I think he was a columnist in the New York Times, so just a tremendous writer, someone that I truly enjoy. But another writer that I'm starting to absolutely adore, Robin Sharma, right? I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the 5 a.m. Club, this little dandy right here, the 5 a.m. Club. So this was one of the books that I came across just because I saw it all over Instagram, right? Like I'm human too. I pick up my future reads just based off of what I'm seeing on social media and social proof, right? If people are raving about a book, there's probably a reason why it's so popular. And that was one of the books. And so far, I just started reading it a couple days ago. There's a certain storytelling vibe, right? And you come across a writer who can easily detail certain intricate parts of a relationship or certain nuances in body language, right? When you can read how a writer is detailing a whole scene and an atmosphere and a mood, you almost forget that you're reading, right? It's almost like you're watching a movie. And it's those types of books that are more of story focused as opposed to, the point by point by point self-help books that sometimes aren't as enjoyable to read. These are the stories that I've definitely been a lot more accustomed to recently.
I love that. Okay, so we know that you're not supposed to think that you need to finish a book. That is a bad habit. What else? Before we get on to how to build a reading habit, are there any other common errors that people are making when they start out?
I think another common error is just focusing on the metrics, right? You get in this idea that I have to read 50 books this year, or I have to read 2 books a month because the latest BusinessInsider.com article said the most successful people are reading X amount of books per month. And I think I'm successful, so I need to live up to that metric, right? So I think beholding yourself to some of those external metrics, and I call vanity metrics, it almost you lose sight of why you're reading in the first place, right? Like at the end of the day, you want to pick up a book to either learn something new, to expand your wisdom, expand your perspective. And if those ideas, those thoughts are clouded by simply, I need to finish this book faster so I can get to my next one, it's counterproductive. So I think just
things, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's more important to just remind yourself why you're reading in the first place, as opposed to, like you just mentioned, like having like a tally mark next to how many books you read just for vanity purposes.
Yeah, I think I love the analogy, and it's not one that I've thought of before, about if you were watching a bad movie, I'm ruthless on Netflix, man. I'm so ruthless. I'm straight out of there. I'm pressing the back button, telling everyone I'm sat with that it's absolutely terrible. So, and it's the same, with books. I think Ryan Holiday, when he reverse interviewed Tim Ferriss on the Tim Ferriss show, they talked about reading quite a lot. Might be an interesting one for you. And I think his heuristic is if you are whatever 100 pages minus your age into a book, and you haven't wanted to send a photo of one of the passages to a buddy going like, oh my God, dude, like you've got to see this. That's the rule that he uses. And I really like that. And I'm thinking back to some of the stuff that's got me recently. So Robert Wright's The Moral Animal just plain took my head off. I was like 2 pages in and I just on my highlights on Kindle, like just the whole page was highlighted. And I'm like, Ryan, you know what you're on about, man. I get it. So yeah, you're totally correct. Having the courage to put a book down, despite what everybody else says, despite whether it's supposed to be cool, despite whether you loved their first book. I loved Mark Manson's Models. So out of not giving a fuck, couldn't give a fuck. So I always wanted to say that. Okay, so that's how we don't build a reading habit. How do we build a reading habit? Where do we start?
It starts with just being upfront about what your interests are, right? So if you take a look at the Get Better with Books page, there's an obvious emphasis on self-help, personal development, business, right? Maybe personal finance books. It's unintended, but I've catered towards a specific demographic of 18 to 34 males, right? College educated males, people who either have a steady career or either getting into the workforce and are interested in upping their game. Right. That's again unintended about how I started and where I'm catered to. But at the end of the day, that's not the interest of everybody out there. Right. There are people who follow my page that are, the 45-year-old woman from Pakistan. Right. And she may not give a fuck about, what Dave Ramsey says about total money makeovers. Right. And that's OK. Right. And back to your question about how to build a reading habit, it's you need to be very honest with yourself about what you're interested in. And starting from, having an idea of what piques your interest, I think if you can choose topics and books and authors that are focused on those interests, that is the best way to build a reading habit, because then it does not feel like a chore. It really just feels like a leisure activity. And once you can start building up a couple books specifically focusing on a topic that you're interested in, and you get that reading habit, then you can start peering into the periphery about, okay, well, what's this, this business stuff, 0 to 1, Peter Thiel, like what's that about? Or Ray Dalio principles. Like I see that all the time. And then reading starts to feel like less like a chore, but you can also expand your knowledge by reading stuff that you're not normally reading.
Yeah. No one goes into the gym and looks at like the big buff guy in the corner and says, yeah, what you lifting there, mate? Right. Okay. I'll put that on my barbell and I'll have a crack and I've fucked my shit up. Like, that's what happens. So again, with that, like it's common sense. And that the Naval quote about reading, read what you love until you love to read. And then David Perel piggybacked off the back of that the other day with his writing course he's got going at the moment. He says, write what you love until you love to write. And the same could be done for exercise. It's do the exercise that you love until you love to exercise as well. Like the easiest training plan is the one that doesn't feel like you've got to go and train.
Exactly.
So we know that we need to pick books, like in terms of topic wise. What do I do next?
Next, and if you're really serious about building the reading habit, it's just like anything else. Like you need to set aside time that you want to dedicate towards building that habit, right? So I think you use the gym analogy all the time, and I like to equate reading to building a strong, habit in the gym, right? Like you don't start bench pressing 315 pounds overnight, right? You have to work your way towards it. But at the same time, you don't do chest exercises 7 days in a row, right? You need to have some sort of balance when it comes to your reading habit. So a lot of people that are asking for book recommendations, a lot of time I just tell them, hey, be open about exploring new topics that you're not normally accustomed to. And here's an example for me. So I obviously read a lot of personal development, self-help, business type books. And a couple months ago at my sister's wedding, my uncle, who had no idea I was running this page, I told him, I was like, hey Frank, I would like you to know that I run a semi a successful book page on Instagram, a couple drinks in, spouting my confidence there. And he's like, okay, I got a couple book recommendations for you. And these two books could not have been farther off the beaten path from the shit that I usually read. One of them was the Zen Art of Motorcycle Maintenance,
Yep.
right? It's one of those legendary, I don't even know how to begin to describe that type of book, but I remember just reading the book, and to the point about getting into the book early, I was so just dumbfounded at what the fuck this book was about. I had no idea what it was about, but I couldn't stop reading it.
Yep.
Right. So I think it's super important to time in and time out to just expose yourself to stuff that you're not accustomed to reading, because that will spark some interest in, again, that periphery. You're like, that actually is interesting. I don't know why I would come across metaphysics and the reason of meaning, and you can get lost in chapters and chapters in that book about what is meaning. What is the definition of meaning? I've never thought about that in my 32 years, but that did spark a little bit of curiosity. And I would not have come across that question if I was not open to taking a recommendation from someone, just to open up my perspective a little bit.
What was the second book?
The second book was called Thunder at Twilight. I forget the name of the author, but it was a historical work based off of Vienna pre-World War I. So it's a lot to do with Austrian politics, Austrian economy. There's a lot of historical features. If you're familiar with Austria and Vienna pre-World War I, I'm sure, Chris, you're very up to date on that specific time of the world.
That's literally my wheelhouse, man. Sometimes I wake up on a morning and just start thinking about it. Yeah.
And that's one of those books where the writing completely lost me, right? Like I was not into it. There's a lot of historical references, a lot of geological references, right? Like certain areas of Austria that they're just riveting off. Like you're in a conversation with someone who knew, and I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I reading? But to my earlier point as to why I actually read it, there was a lot of social pressure as to why I forced myself to finish it, because I was part of a book club with my sister and my dad and my uncle, who actually recommended that book. So I felt a lot of pressure to finish this book, because if I didn't, they'd be like, dude, the hell? Like, I just recommended this book and you didn't even read it, you asshole. So there are some times when I do succumb to social pressure in terms of finishing a book, even though I hate it.
Yeah, I understand completely. So we need to set time aside for it. My suggestion, I don't know how you do it, but as someone, again, I'm total noob as far as sort of the reading journey goes, but my best way is part of the morning routine. Put it in the morning routine, set a timer for 20 minutes and read for 20 minutes. And because I like to go back over stuff quite a lot, I'm quite concerned about retention. That can sometimes maybe even only be like 15 pages. And then sometimes it may be more like, if it's like fiction or something, it might be 30. Right. Actually, it tends to not be fiction on the morning. Another habit as well, another suggestion for people is to read nonfiction by day and read fiction by night. I tend to find that, or not necessarily fiction, but like nonfiction story or biographies by night, basically not personal development by night. If you're trying to really get your mind going about how to upgrade your personal finances, or this psychological strategy for building a business, or working on yourself, sending yourself to sleep with that, to me, doesn't always put me in the quite the right sort of mood. Whereas if I'm just imagining this world or this story or this journal of something that's going on, that can make a bit of a difference.
Yeah, and I've heard similar talk tracks about combining both audiobooks and physical books in the same manner, right? Like you use physical books for self-help, business, and personal development, and you use audiobooks for more of those biographies, memoirs, fiction, things that are easier to digest, right? And at the end of the day, it's whatever works best for you. There's no one right way to consume books, whether if it's audiobooks or reading at night, reading in the morning. As long as you are doing it, you're going to see some benefit from it.
How do we retain what we read?
It's a good question. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I often have too. And I make some references to this in my Get Better with Books page. And I kind of joke at it that retaining books is very challenging, right? Like so often that you come across a book that you're like, damn, that was awesome. I love that book. And then 2 weeks later, someone's like, hey, Jim, like, how's that book? And you're like, So, it was good.
There's a guy. There's a.
It's good. I recommend it.
Yeah,
I recommend it.
Yeah. That's it.
So, I mean, it's natural that it happens to everyone, right? To people who don't admit it, it's very challenging to retain the stuff that you read. That being said, you do have to be very proactive about making sure there are key concepts that you want to keep with you. And the process that I go through, it's just 3 simple steps. Number 1 is I always read with a pencil or a highlighter, some sort of a writing apparatus with me. So every single time I come across something that makes me pause, that makes me go, or that's interesting. Let me expand on that. Something that just tugs on that string of curiosity. Underline it, write it down, and make sure I fold a page down on the corner. So at the end of each chapter or at the end of the book, and it kind of depends on the book, how I want to parse that out. But I always go back to the important parts every single time I finish a book. Right, make sure that I'm taking the time to digest the important parts so I can retain that, right? That's the whole goal here. So if I can take everything that I underlined or jotted down, I either put it in a notebook or I use note cards, right? So I'll take maybe a stack of like 3 or 4 note cards. And I did this for Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, and I have them right on the corner of my windowsill over there, and I try to read them at least once a week. And that's the important part is you underline everything, you write it down in some sort of notebook or note card. But I think the most important thing is you have to revisit them constantly, right? There's no way that you're going to remember something if you don't constantly remind yourself of the importance of it. So for me personally, what I do is I keep those stack of note cards, and once or twice a week, if I have a little free time, I'll just like to cycle through them and reread them and be like, that is interesting. I need to focus more on that. Or, based off of what I know now, maybe that's not as important as I thought. Maybe I'll put it in the back of the pile. But it's very important to constantly keep it top of mind.
It's an interesting analog approach that you've got. So Bookscision or Readwise or Bookly or, any of these different apps that either integrate with an iOS reading app, that integrate with Kindle, that integrate with a Paperwhite, that allow you to export your highlights automatically, and then they'll email them to you every day and all this sort of stuff. Is that just a disposition of yours that you've preferred to go analog rather than digital with both the books you get and the way that you do your highlighting?
Yeah, it's just my preference. And I think a lot of that has to do with the physical aspect of writing it down just helps to ingrain those messages that much more, right? If I'm just simply highlighting something on a Kindle, and I don't use a Kindle at all. Most of my book reading is either through audiobook or physical book, right? So if I can physically underline something, if I can physically write it down and go through that process, I think it helps ingrain that message that much more as opposed to just doing everything digitally.
Yeah. Your retention or the way that you find audiobooks versus normal books reading, how do you stick to what you said before, where you've got more story narrative style stuff on audio and more kind of personal development stuff on books?
Yeah.
That's it. I have to say, like, having developed a reading habit, worked real hard to develop whatever semblance of a reading habit I've got over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. My retention from reading something physically versus listening to it isn't even in the same universe.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with having more of an active versus a passive approach to the reading process itself, right? If you're just listening to an audiobook and maybe you're doing some chores, so you're doing some yard work or something like that, it's really passive. But if you are reading a physical book, and again, this is my personal preference. There's no one right way to do this. But me personally having to be proactive about what I pick and choose to put in my notebook and being proactive to physically pick up these note cards, I think just being more active in that process helps to retain, at least in my opinion.
I think as well, we need to, so much of this is individual, right? There might be someone listening who's got perfect retention of what they consume on audio. And I have fantastic retention, what I consume through podcasts. I can tell you, like, the type of fire hydrant outside of Chris D'Elia's house, like, all the total useless information, which I absolutely...
What kind of fire hydrant was it?
It's a silver one because he lives in Beverly Hills. And in Beverly Hills, you get silver fire hydrants.
Someday we'll have our nice fire.
Yeah. So, just like random stuff. And it's like, I can pick that up through podcasts.
Yeah.
Audiobooks retention's a little bit less. I feel less involved. There's less energy going on, in my opinion. But if I'm not so bothered about retention and it's more the overall feel, And again, that relates to the type of book, right? If there's a core lesson, which is the whole book trying to give it to you with a number of different stories, perhaps an audiobook would be great for that. Whereas if it's like, if it's the 10 things you need to do to complete your X, you're only going to get like maybe one or two if that's not the style that you learn in.
Yeah, exactly. And you do a good job at reminding people that there is no one right way to do it, but also to the point that certain books out there are just so much harder to retain, right? Like if you've read Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, right? There's so many different laws and a lot of them are contradictory. You're like, hey, law 13, you told me something else, and law 17, it's completely different. So I think it's important to distill what type of book it is, but also at the same time, just cut yourself some slack. You're not going to remember it if you.
I'll tell you what is a terrible audiobook to listen to, Thinking Fast and Slow.
It's a challenging read if you actually sit down and read it too. It's challenging regardless of how you consume it.
Yeah, the way, because there's so many mental exercises, and it's like, look at this list of letters on either side of the page, and you're listening to it and you're like, and someone had said, bro, you don't want to try and listen to that book. And I was like, no, fuck you. It's 20 hours plus. Like, I'm listening to this. I'm not reading this. And then sure enough, I was an hour into it and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who anybody is. I think he got married to her. Like, I don't know. So, okay, right. Yeah. We're into the meat of it. This is what everybody came for. So let's say that I'm getting into reading personal development. What gets me through the door? What's the entrance ticket into the world of personal development? Where do I start?
I think the first book that I always recommend people is Atomic Habits by James Clear, for a lot of reasons, right? It's one of those books that's easy to read. It's not convoluted in the messaging, but also the language to convey the lessons. But there's actionable insights, right? And I gauge a lot of how I see a book based off of how easy it is to consume, but also how easy it is to implement. Right. And Atomic Habits is just an A+ in both of those regards. And it's something, and I was actually just thinking about this today because a little plug for Get Better with Books. I'm building out a YouTube account. My first video that I'm planning right now is all about the 5 life-changing books that I've come across, and Atomic Habits was one of them. And one of the key components that I always remind myself about Atomic Habits is having an identity-based habit system. And you see you're nodding your head because this is something that if you're in that personal development sphere, it's something you take very serious, right? Like if you want to build a better reading habit, rather than just being like, oh, I need to do this and this to become a better reader, rather than doing that, you should just focus on seeing yourself as a reader, identifying yourself as a reader, but then also taking it one step further and thinking, what would a reader do? Right. So almost reverse engineering that habit by identifying yourself as someone who's already had that and then going forward with small little wins. Right. And that's just a quick snippet of Atomic Habits. And it's just one of those books that every single person I've come across has come back universally saying this was a fucking awesome book.
Outrageous.
Thank you for recommending it. Yes.
The fact that it's so new does it a disservice, I think. In a way, there's the Lindy the Lindy argument that you should be reading books that are the classics,
right?
And that is the antidote to the fact that there is a lot of self-development books that come out all the time, and you need to be careful in what you invest your time in. But obviously, that puts new classics on the back foot. And Atomic Habits can be read in 20, 30 years time, 100%.
Yep. So that's always near the top of the list for me. And that, to add on top of that, in terms of easy takeaways, the number 2 book that I always recommend, it is a classic. Back to that, how long has this book been available for? Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. So this is a staple in that self-development, personal self-help regiment, right, if you will. That book's been around for close to 100 years now, and it is still on the top of the bestsellers list because of how, again, easy it is to digest and how easy it is to implement it into your daily life. And how I came across this book was an interesting story. So I just graduated college. It was, almost 8-9 years ago. Had no idea what I was doing with my future, right? Like, it's just aimlessly wandering around my early 20-year-old existence, right? And I was puttering around at my house, and I was walking through my dad's old office. He run his own business from the basement of my parents' house. So when he moved out, he left all of his books there. So I was just going through some of his old books, and I came across this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I was like, oh, sounds interesting, right? I just based a book by its cover, quite literally there. So I picked it up, I read it in probably a couple days time, and it really changed my perspective mainly on how you communicate with people, number one, but number two, having the perspective to see how your message is perceived by the other person's eyes, right? If you can communicate with someone and not be all about me, but rather look from their perspective as to why would this person even want to talk to me? Well, most likely they want to talk about themselves, right? People are inherently selfish and they want to talk about themselves, right? That's just the nature of people. So if you can use that to your advantage, one of the key adages that I always use from How to Win Friends and Influence People is to be interesting, be interested. So if you are talking to someone and you can genuinely be interested in what they're saying, and you say, "Hey, tell me a little bit more about that." Oh, that's fascinating. How is that impacting your life? And really just having that perspective of how is this conversation beneficial to that person? People will come away from that conversation being like, "Holy shit, Jim is a great conversationalist," even though that person just talked 45 minutes about themselves.
Yeah, I can't remember the book that this is in. Oh, this is going to kill me. You might be able to tell me. There was a study done where they put a guy on a plane and they said, we need you to sit, I need you to speak to the person next to you for the entire flight. And it's like an 8-hour flight. Like, don't let them, they're not allowed to look at the screen. They're not allowed to look out, just get their attention. But you're not allowed to tell them anything about you, not even your name. Not allowed to tell them anything about you. And anyway, we get off and they do a little survey afterwards. And they're going up to all of the passengers, but it's this particular guy that they're looking for. They get to the person he was speaking to, and they say, hello, sir, we're just going around today, just doing a little bit of a survey. Just wanted to ask how your flight was and who you were sat next to and what you talked about. He said, I was sat next to this amazing guy. He's such a phenomenal guy. Like, it's just classic conversation. He said, oh, that's brilliant. Would you be able to tell us his name? And the guy's like, no, and that just drills it home, right? People like to talk about themselves, and I think as well, like, it's not often that people are interested. Like, this is a catastrophe that plays off the back of something which is real pervasive. That you don't often get people that are interested. So when you do, you're like, fucking shit! Like, I can open myself up and I can talk about.
They're not staring at their phone while they're talking.
I can play with ideas. Okay. How to Win Friends and Influence People, Atomic Habits. Where are we going next?
Third, it's a combination of two, because there's really two modes of thought here. One is if you want to go down a motivational route, book Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins is just one of those books that just kicks you in the ass, right? This dude, if you've heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast or if you've heard his audiobook, like, he is just that raw motherfucker that's, fuck this, fuck that, come on, stay hard. And you're listening to this guy and you're like, you don't even realize, but your fists are clenched and you're like, your jaw's clenched and you're like, you're about to rip off some flesh with your bare teeth. But that's just one of those motivational books where you listen to someone's story and you can really understand how far the human potential can take, and just based off of your own mental limitations, right? So if you can distill someone's personal journey just based off of pushing those boundaries, it starts to open up your eyes as to, maybe I'm being a little bit of bitch in this area of my life, or, maybe I gave up a little bit easier there. So it's those types of motivational stories that I actually made a post about it on my Instagram yesterday about Goggins has this unique capability of calling out your bullshit while motivating you at the same time. And I think it's those types of books that keep you accountable, to look yourself in the mirror. Like, he uses the accountability mirror, right? He emphasizes that, just making sure that you're doing everything that you can day in and day out to push that potential. But the second book, and this is a little bit away from that motivational, is to Cal Newport, like you were saying about digital minimalism. One of my favorite books, especially right now, given the state of the world, state of the events, is Deep Work. Right? And if you are a creative, if you are an entrepreneur, if you are doing anything where you want your work to speak for itself, I think it's never been more important than it is right now to set aside some time where you are uninterrupted, where you can take long periods of time to focus on your work at hand. And I think Cal Newport does a great job at outlining why deep work, given the state of events right now, is one of the most important skills that you can work on.
It's a term all of its own now, right?
Yeah.
Like, people talk about doing deep work,
Right.
And it's a reference to him. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's an antithesis. It is it's the antidote to the always on million projects, million tabs open at once catastrophe that we find ourselves in. Okay, so we've got our foundation for self-development. We're in the door now. And why don't we do some books that you think people may not have either heard of or not read, some undiscovered gems, still staying in the self-development space, and then we'll go into more like a biography and then maybe a couple of fictions as well.
Sure. So if we want to start with a book that's a little bit under the radar that is equally as important when it comes to personal development and self-help, it's a book by James Allen called As a Man Thinketh. It's a very simple read. I think it's no more than 150 pages, but the basis of that is it's very similar to Napoleon's Hill, concept about thinking good thoughts and making sure that you're proactive about the way that you're thinking, right? Using thinking as a model for success. And it's similar to Marcus Aurelius, right? When he says control your thoughts, control your life. The basis of this book, As a Man Thinketh, is just being very proactive about your thoughts as an entity. Right. So if you go about your day being very pessimistic, very cautious, being overall doom and gloom, right? Like that's going to manifest itself in your actions and the way that you pursue your ambitions in life. But if you're overall optimistic, if you're overall energetic, and if you believe in yourself, if you tell yourself and you're constantly reminding yourself that you're capable of doing powerful things, and this is just based off of having that initial thought process that you can, it's just something that you can constantly use to cultivate a lot of that positive energy in your life. And I think one of the key takeaways and the key quotes that I got from that is he compares your mind to a garden. Right. And if you're constantly cultivating your mind in a way that you're cultivating a lot of good thoughts, it's going to yield a lot of positive things. Right. It's going to yield a bountiful fruit or vegetables, things that's going to be nourishing to your life. Whereas if you're neglecting your thoughts, if you're neglecting your mind, similar to a garden, it's going to yield a lot of weeds. A lot of things that are going to clutter your vision, right? So I think it's very important to be very proactive about how you think, because that in itself manifests into your life.
Yeah, and also not a very nice place to be. An ugly garden, as my garden youth 4 years ago. Now it's beautiful. I got flower wall and everything. But yeah, tend to your garden. What's next? What else we got? Let's go another sort of underknown, underrated self-development.
Actually, an interesting book that you may know well aware of as Economy of the Truth by Dizzy and Drake.
Yeah. Have you got the second version? Have you got the new version?
I haven't got the new version yet.
Vizzy, what you doing, man? He's done an expanded version. I have a couple of copies over there. That's literally just now. I don't think he can get it to himself, so he's in Romania, and Amazon isn't delivering his own book to him. So he sent it to me and he was like, yo, bro, can you just have a go through and see if there's any printing errors and stuff like that, which is so hilarious. So yeah, no worries. But yeah, Economy of Truth by Vizzy. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's another one of those books, and we were talking about this earlier in the conversation about distilling wisdom into that bite-sized, manageable format and content. And I think Vizzy is someone who I interacted mainly off of my Instagram page. Like, he hit me up. I had actually been following him on my personal account for almost a year before I started my page, and he had reached out to me. So I was almost a little like starstruck. I'm like, shit, Vizzy's reaching out to me. I made it. But it's just one of those books it's just parsed down wisdom. It covers everything from philosophy and just daily personal development. It's just one of those books that's easy to consume, but at the same time gets you to think. And I think at the end of the day, if you can read a book that actually creates an opportunity to pause and think, I think you're on something good there.
It's a unique type of book. It's short aphorisms. You could pick it up and put it down in a page. Right. As long as you gave yourself 3 or 4 minutes to think about what was on that page and how it relates to your life. It's a very unique way of reading. And as we mentioned earlier on, much more active, So, okay, let's get into perhaps some more, not necessarily personal development, but still nonfiction, just either some favorites, some unknown ones, whatever you think.
Yeah. So there's a recent trend that I've been encountering. It's the memoir type of book, where it's an individual who's not writing about their whole life story, but more so just like a very specific focus and experience that happened in the course of their life. And one of the books that I just encountered, memoir style, was Educated by Tara Westover. It was a phenomenal story, and it was just based off of this girl who grew up in Bumfuck, Idaho. Right, and this was a recent story, true story too. She was part of a family that was deeply religious, but also fiercely separatist. So her father was one of those guys that says, school is the devil, school, the government, Illuminati, like distrust everything. So she came from a family that was very rarely homeschooled, no formal education, but she got to a point in her adolescence where she said, I want to go to school. And the book was all about her trajectory from basically having no education to getting into BYU, getting honors, going to grad school, getting her doctorate from Harvard University. And this transition from having no education to having the most education, some of the key tenets there are all about your identity, right? Like how do you see yourself throughout the course of your transition, your adolescence, and through the course of your life? And for her, her family always harped on having an education as something that was, untrustworthy, right? Like, oh, you're one of them. You're one of those educated folks. And it's one of those books where you have this identity of who you think you are and how you see yourself, but also in relation to your closest, friends and family, right? So how does my family perceive me? How does that affect how I see myself? But it's also about just having the confidence in your own identity to say, hey, this may piss people off. This may rub people the wrong way, but I have enough convictions in myself that this is who I truly am, regardless of the consequences. So I can't recommend that one enough. It's one of those page turners where you come across an author who's just a fantastic writer and storyteller. So Educated, Tara Westover, highly recommended.
Amazing. What's next?
Shoe Dog. For those who have followed my page, obviously I do a lot of personal development, business type books, but Shoe Dog falls into one of those books that is just one of an absolute page turners. So if anyone who has not read Shoe Dog, it's a personal memoir by Phil Knight, who is the founder of a little company called Nike, right? And it goes through his upbringing from how he was a local track star in Oregon to how he started this fledgling company into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Right. And that in itself is an interesting story. But if we talk about what makes a book interesting and what really gravitates you, it's that writing style. And Phil Knight has one of those unique writing styles where it's almost like it's like a vapor, right? It's like he's going off in every single direction, but it's so eloquent in the essence where you can get what he's saying, but there's so much style and charisma to the way that he writes. So Shoe Dog, definitely add that one to your list too.
I love it. And then one that might be a little bit less well known from that similar sort of genre before we do a bit of fiction.
Yeah, one thing that I would also add to that list, it's another recent book similar to that vein about business and personal memoirs, was The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger, who was actually just recently stepped down as the CEO and chairman of Disney, right? So one of these business titans that talks a lot about his upbringing. And this is an interesting point. When you read a lot of these business and memoir type books, you see a lot of commonalities. You see a lot of similarities between these people who have so much success. And The Ride of a Lifetime is one of those books where these guys just have an insatiable work ethic. They have the confidence, they have the vision, but they also have the wherewithal when they come across failures and they come across life just kicking them down a peg, having a lot of confidence in yourself to dust yourself off and keep going. So Ride of a Lifetime, Bob Iger, Rise of Disney as a company, definitely a great read too.
That's sick. And now finishing up, a couple of fiction books. We've got our daytime reads sorted. We maybe got a couple of nighttime reads as well. What are some fiction books that you've read recently that you've enjoyed?
So there's one fiction book that I will always recommend, and this one was given to me by an old colleague of mine, was a book called Watership Down. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's a story about rabbits.
Okay.
Right. So it's a book about how a flock of rabbits was displaced due to deforestation and their trek across uncharted land. Right. And you're thinking, okay, a book about rabbits, how is that relevant? But I think it talks a lot about key tenets of camaraderie, shared mission, courage, right? A lot of these key tenets, virtues that you like to see in the hero's journey, right? And it's seeing it unveiled in these cute, cuddly rabbits and the constant threat of predators like foxes and great horned owls, right? The things that you don't see as a predator, but for you look in the perspective of a rabbit, you think, holy shit, life as a rabbit's pretty hard these days. But it's just one of those. It's again one of those stories that's very easy to follow along, but at the same time, like you get some inspiration and personal reflection from reading about rabbits.
I like the idea of using fiction as a way to learn lessons that some personal development books can't teach us. I always use the example about 1984 that it taught me more about appreciating the power of my thoughts than pretty much any other self-development book could have done. Because it's delivered in this allegorical, weird sort of symbolic way. It's an odd one. But look, man, Jim, it has been so fun. I implore everybody to go and check out at Get Better with Books on Instagram. When's the YouTube channel going to be live? And is that Get Better with Books as well?
That's also Get Better with Books. Yeah. I got my microphone being shipped from Amazon.com this weekend. So I plan on filming, editing, and posting my first video this weekend. After that. So it will be in the show notes below. Anything else that you want to plug? Any other things people should go and check out of yours? No, that's it. Right now, I just got the Instagram handle, get the YouTube coming out. So working on and just keep creating good content, and I appreciate everybody for the time and the attention.
Bro, it's an absolute pleasure. You need to go and check this out. I also have to give a shout out to how patient you are to align books perfectly straight. Like the ability to put books in completely neat lines with all the gaps being exactly the same way is just, that's not a
little bit OCD, but at the same time, gotta put good content out there. IG is very competitive, so take the time to post good pics, baby.
Yeah, I get it, man. Look, Jim, thank you so much. Everyone that's been listening, all of the books that we've just gone through will be linked below in the show notes, every single one of them. So you think, I'm going to go check that out, all linked in the show notes below. You need to go and give Jim a follow at Get Better with Books. But for now, thanks, man. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Chris. Good chatting with you. Be well.